Just 1 second, and we are ready to start. Okay, so ready to start. Thank you. Just 1 second. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our online global dialogue on digital inclusion for all, shaping our digital future. My name is Amila Mabat. I coordinate the NGO and outreach activities in my division for inclusive social development of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We are very pleased that this online global dialogue is taking place during our 59th session of the Commission for Social Development, CSocD59, which this year is focusing on socially just transition towards sustainable development, the role of digital technologies on social development and well-being of all. On behalf of UNDESA, I would like to thank all of our partners, speakers, and the audience who are joining us today to discuss this important issue related to the digital inclusion for all. I would like to thank the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, for its excellent collaboration and support to make also this event happen. Before I start, I would like to give you a short overview of the work we do in my division. We have a unique global mandate on groups of people that have traditionally been left behind, such as persons with disabilities, older persons, youth, indigenous peoples, as well as issues related to families, cooperatives, sports for peace and development. We also work towards eradicating poverty, promoting employment, decent jobs, and fostering inclusion, participation, and also reducing inequalities. So COVID-19 has shown the critical role of digital technologies in promoting the well-being of all people. However, as COVID-19 accelerates the pace of digitization, billions of people are still excluded and unable to access the benefits of these technologies, such as e-learning, telemedicine, and e-finance. Digital technologies offer new opportunities to advance social development. In particular, they can empower marginalized social groups. They can also foster their social inclusion and participation. They can also support and accelerate the achievement of all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Digital inclusion is about much more than access to the internet, but it's about social justice and equity. So the message is clear: leaving no one behind means leaving no one offline. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in our event. The event will be recorded and live streamed on our UN Web TV at webtv.un.org. It's also the link in the chat. It will be also live streamed on our YouTube channel. The same link also is available on the chat. Closed captions also will be available here. So you can click on the Zoom function, closed captions, and you can activate it. Participants will have opportunity to ask questions to the Q&A functions on Zoom. So please use the chat function only for sharing your comments or any resources relating to the topic of our online global dialogue. I would also ask to, I would remind all of our participants to kindly keep your microphone on mute and your video turned off unless you are speaking. And also I will ask all the panelists to leave their cameras on all the time unless if it's not possible. We have a rich agenda today and a group of excellent speakers. So we will now begin the opening session. Now, without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce Her Excellency, Ms. Maria del Carmen Square, Ambassador of the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the UN and the chair of the 59th session of the Commission for Social Development, who will deliver her opening remarks. Ambassador, you have now the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Amine. Dear colleagues, good morning to you all. First of all, I would like to thank DESA for inviting me to participate and to have the opportunity to address to you in my capacity of chair of the 59th session of the Commission of Social Development. As it was mentioned by one panelist in the session, digital technologies are not only tools for emergency situations, because in this pandemic crisis, they help us to keep our societies functional. But digital technologies are also tools that provide opportunities for each person, such as access to education, to a dignified work, among the exercise of other basic human rights. Having said that, I think that today it is crucial to recognize the role of active states because they have the responsibility, in collaboration with other actors, to implement inclusive policy. So we do not leave no one offline or without access to digital technologies. During the session, I listened to several panelists who stressed that we are moving towards a new concept of digital citizenship. And if we do not close all the existing digital devices, we are moving towards two parallel worlds. The one in which people have access to digital technologies, and the one in which there is not access at all. That is why, dear colleagues, it is high time to recognize the important role of inclusive digital policies in order to address the needs of those invisible who are experiencing the gender digital divide or lack of affordability because they cannot assume the cost of the service to access the internet, among other situations. Since part of our work in this Commission for Social Development is to share good practices and solutions to the existing challenges, let me share with you a measures implemented on my country. The Argentina government last August 2020 decided to declare internet access to television and mobile services as a universal basic benefit. This policy aims at guaranteeing the human right of access to information and communication technologies. In this sense, the national communication entity established basic subscription that the company must provide to users who request it as long as they belong to the university of beneficiaries. For instance, a retired person can access the internet by paying a monthly fee of $8 for the service. In addition, there are also very valuable initiatives in the international and regional sphere, such as the one presented by the Economic Commission for Latin American and Caribbean, that aims at ensuring and universalizing connectivity and the affordability of digital technology to address the many impacts of the coronavirus pandemic in the region. To this end, Economic Commission proposed 5 lines of action that include building an inclusive digital society, driving a productivity transformation, fostering digital trust and security, strengthening regional digital cooperation, and moving towards a new governance model to ensure a digital welfare state that would promote equality. The Economic Commission for Latin America also proposed to the region's countries ensuring a basic basket of information and communication technology made up of a laptop, a smartphone, a tablet, and a connection plan for households that are not connected at an annual cost of less than 1% of GDP. This initiative and measures help us to understand how important it is to build and rebuild our countries with present states and consider the Agenda 2030 as the way forward to achieve more equal and just societies. Dear colleagues, when we think of solutions to existing problems that are exacerbated by this pandemic, such as hunger or extreme poverty, we must think of long-term solutions to create societies where all individuals have the same real opportunities to have a dignified life. It is crucial to empower people and guarantee their social inclusion so tomorrow they have the chance to have a dignified work and exercise their most basic human right. The pandemic we are experiencing is not a mere accident in history. It is a wake-up call to build a common house with other foundations in which solidarity plays a key role. Let me finish by quoting one Argentine artist. Traveling strengthens to hurt because walking new roads make you forget the old ones. Let's forget the roads we are traveling because they replicate and deepen the inequalities. Let's build new roads to create more equal society for everyone. Hope you have a very good discussion, a very good meeting today in the morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your insightful remarks. I now have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Daniela Bass, Director of our Division for Inclusive Social Development at UNDESA. Ms. Bass, you have now the floor. Thank you. You're muted, sorry, Ms. Daniela.
Yes, thank you. I noticed it. Thank you very much and welcome everyone. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, colleagues, and of course, ladies and gentlemen and friends. Well, I'm very honored to be the director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We are supporting the Commission for Social Development, and my colleague Amin Lamrabat today as information officer. He is running beautifully this session with amazing experts. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the International Telecommunication Union as well, with whom the ISD DESA has built throughout the years an excellent collaboration for co-organizing this important online global dialogue on digital inclusion for all people of all ages and of all abilities. We live in an era of rapid change, driven in large part by technological advances, and in particular, digital technologies have the power to empower people and to overcome social exclusion and to promote financial inclusion. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has clearly showed the power of digital technologies, which have enabled billions of people around the world to continue to work remotely, as we're doing now, study online, use e-health services, shop online, and connect with their families and their friends, as I am doing regularly with my parents on the other side of the ocean in Italy. So yet an estimated 3.7 billion people, half of the world's population, does not use the internet. Therefore, missing the tremendous benefits brought by the digital technologies that we are using. And with the strict social and physical distancing measures that are in place now, those offline populations face further isolation and risk being excluded from various services which are increasingly being digitalized, as we know. So to ensure inclusive and resilient recovery, we must close the digital divide and promote digital inclusion of those who are disadvantaged or in vulnerable situations. And let me mention a few, and these are not all those, but just a few. Think of women and girls, older persons, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, those living in poverty, in rural and remote areas, just among others. So we needed to take a holistic and integrated approach, I believe, in the following areas. And let me mention four. The first one is access. Extend access, aiming at achieving universal access to internet while eliminating architectural and cultural barriers for everyone to have access also to the physical environment, not only to the virtual one. And here I'm making reference, for instance, to persons with some sort of temporary or permanent physical, sensory, cognitive, or invisible impairment or disabling condition. The second, affordability, as our ambassador just said. Reduce the cost of connection in digital as well as assistive devices. The third one is skills, enhances digital skills and literacy for people of all ages, not only youth. And four, awareness, raising awareness of benefits and risks of digital technologies, and create relevant content in local languages, as well as eliminate, as I said, cultural barriers to the internet use. So let me mention a few examples of these opportunities for inclusion and development. Now, digital technologies are helping to deliver social services, for instance, to refugees. And refugees themselves are using mobile apps and services to share information, locate family members, and find work. Another example, persons with disabilities can be more autonomous and independent because of accessible and assistive technologies, and facilitate, therefore, their full participation in society. And what about youth? Digital technologies have also empowered the youth by providing new jobs, income generating opportunities through e-commerce and digital banking. And, digital technologies have also helped to bring financial services to underdeserved communities and, for example, to women through mobile phones with the digital payment systems. So you see, a multi-stakeholder approach involving national and local governments, academia, the scientific community, civil society organizations, the private sector, and the active participation of the beneficiaries, with particular attention to vulnerable and or disadvantaged groups of the society and communities, are key to develop strategies and policies together to address the digital divide and promote digital inclusion. The pace of digital transformation has accelerated during the COVID-19. Therefore, if united globally, together, we can advance social development and achieve the 2030 agenda with leaving no one behind, then let's do it. This global dialogue will provide the space for the participation to discuss this important issue with a pragmatic approach and concluded with solutions, I hope, and innovative ideas. So we need to join hands and collaborate, SDG 17, so that from our efforts, everyone can benefit from digital technologies to move out of poverty, SDG 1, engage in decent work, SDG 8, reduce inequalities, SDG 10, and create an inclusive and resilient future for all, DG 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, and 16. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Bass, for your insightful remarks. I have now the pleasure of inviting Ms. Doreen Bogdan Martin, Director of the ITU's Telecommunication Development Bureau. Ms. Bogdan Martin, you have now the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Amin, and thank you, Daniela. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Geneva. Really pleased to be with you and to be partnering with DESA on digital inclusion for all of the 59th session of the Commission for Social Development. When the UN Secretary General addressed the member states on his priorities for 2021, he identified the urgent need to seize the opportunities of digital technologies and address what he called the yawning gap in access to these tools. Well, as Daniela has just highlighted, that's a big task because, as she noted, right now, there's 3.7 billion people that still lack any form of access, and that's 49% of the world's population. Information and communication technologies have taken the world by storm. And of course, never in human history has any technology been so rapidly embraced. But I think we have reached an inflection point in our mission to connect the world, and getting that remaining 49% of the world's population online is going to be a whole different ballgame. This time around, business as usual is not going to work. We really need to rapidly change our approach and to shift from a highly competitive mindset to a collaborative, cross-sectoral mindset. We need to work together, to join hands, as Daniela said, to get networks out into the rural areas where it might not have been profitable to go. Because the bottom line is that we all profit enormously from bringing that half of the population still unconnected into our global digital community. We need their voices, their participation, and their engagement if we're going to truly harness the potential of digital to achieve the SDGs. But to get there, we need to put in place the right regulatory policy frameworks that will help to create investment-friendly, enabling environments. But at the same time, we also need to change our strategy and focus on implementing a whole of government approach that can deliver meaningful digital services at scale and with greater return on investment. Our Smart Village project in Niger is built around this holistic approach, and it's a solid example of work towards SDG 16 to promote inclusive societies. But it also helps to advance SDG 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, and 17. Ladies and gentlemen, digital inclusion was well placed on the UN SDG's digital cooperation roadmap, stressing that digital divides reflect and amplify existing social, culture, and economic inequalities. So who's being left behind? And Daniela covered this well. Certain communities, women, persons with disabilities, the elderly, those with poor literacy skills, rural and remote, these are the groups that experience the most acute forms of digital exclusion. And of course, let's not forget about the situation of people on the move, including migrants, or those facing emergency and conflict-affected situations, given that these most vulnerable communities often face additional challenges in achieving connectivity. And ICTs have tremendous scope to open up a whole new world of opportunities and possibilities for these and other marginalized groups. So how can we get there? I mentioned the enabling frameworks, the whole of government approach, but we do also need to actively and creatively think about accessibility issues when we're designing devices. We need to think about affordability and cost, meaningfulness. What do you get when you're connected? What languages do you find when you get connected? Let's also not forget about the skills. To achieve inclusive digital societies, we need to ensure those digital skills are in place as they open up rewarding career paths and pave the way towards greater social and economic empowerment. And I do want to quickly share some innovative solutions and good practices that are examples as well of partnerships and opportunities for stakeholders to engage. On our side, we've launched a series of digital transformation centers, working with partners such as NORAD from Norway, with Cisco and others, in delivering training to people at all levels of the e-skills pyramid, but really focusing on that basic digital literacy. And we're doing that in 11 countries. We have our Equals Global Partnership, which is another example of a multi-stakeholder initiative. That one's focused on SDG 5 and 10 to achieve gender equality and reduce inequalities in bridging the gender digital divide in access, skills, and women in the tech sector. And of course, COVID has shown us, like nothing else could, what it means to be digitally excluded, especially for many millions and millions of learners. With 1.6 billion young people impacted by school closures, we know at least 1/3 of them don't have any form of connectivity, didn't have any form, and continue not to have any form of connectivity or device to be connected. The Malala Foundation estimates that at least 20 million affected girls will not go back to school. And that alone is a rallying cry for the urgency to close the digital divide and advocate for digital inclusion for all. And to respond on our side, we ramped up our GIGA partnership between ITU and UNICEF and others to connect every school to the internet and every young person to information, opportunity, and choice. And with COVID, we've redoubled our efforts and broadened our scope so that classroom connectivity can also serve as a vital connectivity hub for the entire community. As we accelerate our efforts in this final decade of action, leading to the 2030 target date for the SDGs, there's no doubt that we're going to have to power through with digital. And we can only get there through partnerships. And with a strong focus on SDG 17, partnerships for development, I believe that the ITU's upcoming World Telecommunications Development Conference in November will prove a truly landmark development conference in leveraging the power of partnerships to connect the world and deliver on our Sustainable Development Pledge. I would invite you all to join us. I look forward to forging new partnerships, to pioneering new ways of collaborating, and working actively with all of you to harness the power of digital to build back better and shape a digital future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mogdan Martin, for your insightful remarks. I now have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Shamika Siriman, Director of the Division on Technology and Logistics at UNCTAD. Ms. Siriman, you have now the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Amin. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and let me first thank the Secretariat and Daniela yourself, because you are the Secretariat of the Commission for Social Development, for inviting me to be part of this very important global dialogue. And I think many of you have already mentioned that the COVID-19 has made everyone realize both the formidable power of digital technologies, but also the unacceptable depth of the divides that limit people's access and participation in the emerging digital world. So let me focus on two issues that all stakeholders should address in their digital development policies. As Doreen mentioned, digital development is not a one ministry's work. It's not the ICT ministry or the trade ministry or the regulators' work. It has to be a whole of government approach. And not just the government, you also need to bring other stakeholders on board, because we are basically chartering for a new future. And all that are going to be living in that future need to participate in policymaking. So 2 issues. First, I would raise the relationship between digital inequalities and socio-economic inequalities. Second, I like to bring to your attention the 2 waves of technological change related to digital technologies and their differing impacts on our societies. And I'm bringing these discussions also from the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which is the focal point in the UN system for STI policy discourse. And that commission is, the secretariat for that commission is UNCTAD. So I think this is a good place where we have the 2 commissions meeting and sharing the lessons and the concerns that our commissions raise. So I'm going to bring to you the discussion from the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. So on the first point, relationship between digital inequalities and social economic inequalities. It's remarkable how much progress we have achieved in the deployment and access to digital technologies. I mean, today we have mobile cellular signals reaching more than 95% of the global population on one hand. And as all of you mentioned, Daniela and Doreen, you all then mentioned, but 50% of the world population do not have access to this amazing technology that is confronting us. But I also want to bring to your attention that this aggregate number of 50% hides tremendous inequalities within and across countries. You see, for example, the proportion of people using the internet in developed countries is more than 4 times than in the least developed countries. Another number, on average, women are 17% less likely than men to use the internet. And the gap ranges from 3% in developed countries to 43% in least developed countries. So this is the 50% is, that's a good number. Once you go inside this 50%, the picture becomes quite ugly. And then I want to put to you that the connectivity is not enough. The usual barriers to women and other vulnerable groups in terms of skills, access to finance, access to shaping policy, these are still there. These are the old world's problems. They are still there. And they are formidable barriers to these groups to reach the benefits, reap the benefits from these emerging technologies. Now, take the case of the gender divide in STEM, ICT, and computing. And this is pretty serious. The proportion of women researchers in engineering and technology in most developing countries is about 10 to 40%. And 40% is a very good number. It's rarely you see those numbers. When it comes to digital technologies, women are at an even smaller minority among computer science graduates. And even after they graduate, they do not remain in these jobs, they leave jobs. So there is a leaky pipe for women in STEM studies. And of course, then they are going to be underrepresented among STI decision makers and in the digital sector. And that's what we have seen. Even though women and other vulnerable groups have a huge potential, because the internet does not, there's no bias when you're buying and selling on internet. I don't know whether you're a woman or not, even if I have bias against women, I don't know these things. So internet is a good hider of these biases. But you see, we are not being able to reap the benefits from digital economy if women are pushed back and other vulnerable groups are pushed back by these many faceted barriers. Now, let me put to you that gender and other digital divides result from socioeconomic inequalities. And in a vicious circle, they reinforce existing inequalities. So as new digital technologies are developed and the digital and physical worlds get more and more connected, digital and social inequalities will also become more and more the same. And in fact, this should keep us all awake at night. So we are walking into a world out there carrying all this baggage of biases, and they probably, unless addressed, they will probably get amplified in this journey towards the digital world. So the policy response needs to be as multidimensional as the digital inequalities themselves. I think, Doreen, you mentioned the whole of government approach. So this is necessary. From the economic perspective, this requires policies to enable e-commerce, which is one of the fastest growing areas of trade. Even when the international trade is in bad shape, e-commerce has been growing at a remarkable pace. And we need to support the competition in digital markets to help digital innovators and improve digital skills so that people are ready to use digital solutions as traders, consumers, or workers. And then on the side of the social policies also have a critical role to ensure inclusiveness, awareness, and the social relevance of digital applications. I think, Daniela, you already mentioned many of these issues. It's critical to address concerns about the impact of digitalization on people's rights. The issues that you mentioned about the privacy, and they are all out there. We don't have answers to these things. So as digitalization spreads from e-commerce, finance, entertainment, and a few services to encompass most aspects of economic activities, countries need to prepare themselves to the consequences for industrialization, jobs, inequality, and trade competitiveness. So this then leads to my second point. I said there are two waves of technological change. I think we need to put that in context as we discuss about the predicament of countries at different layers of development. You see, one is the digital revolution, Web 2.0 technologies. And this wave is at its peak. It has already affected most developed countries and their economic sectors, and has made good headways in the higher income developing countries. We can see now a big push for digitalization and e-commerce and digital digital industrialization in lower income developing countries. So that's the one wave. And the other technological wave concerns AI, robotics, IoT, blockchain, and other technologies associated with Industry 4.0. And this wave is at its initial stage in the technological revolution paradigm. So we are at a very initial stage of something coming our way, and very fast, and we don't even know what's going to hit us. And many people in low-income countries see AI and robotics are things of a distant future, because they are still mostly living at the beginning of the previous technological wave. But countries should be concerned both with the deployment of Web 2.0 technologies and with making preparations for the frontier technological revolution that's coming our way, because the nature of the digital technologies are they come very, very fast. So this time, the early industrial revolutions and the deployment of technologies are taking years and decades. The electricity, we will not see it. We will see much faster deployment of technologies. So their strategies will be extremely context specific. Some middle-income countries are already, like Mexico, Thailand, they are already focusing more on emerging Industry 4.0 and cybersecurity sectors, and direct the deployment of digital infrastructure and development of skills in that direction. And whereas the lower end of the development ladder of LDCs, for example, they are still prioritizing the digitalization of value chains related to lower skilled intensive sectors, and that will reflect in the development of other areas as infrastructure, the skills, entrepreneurship, and finance. But we need to help them to prepare for the jump onto the next wave of technological revolution, so that they will not be left behind yet again. So let me now finally give you a couple of things that we do at UNCTAD. We help countries to navigate these policies.
Sorry if I interrupt. You have 1 minute left. Thank you.
We help countries to navigate these policy questions around digital technologies and inclusive and sustainable development. We have 2 flagship reports on digital economy report and technology and innovation report addressing these issues. In fact, the innovation report will be launched next week, and it is looking at the frontier technologies and inequalities. And we are also helping countries to prepare for e-commerce so that they can benefit from these technologies. So let me finally say thank you again for this collaboration between the UNCSTD and the Commission on Social Development. And I think this is a best practice, and this is a way to go, that increasingly these ECOSOC commissions should come together and share experience. So Daniela, on that, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Seeman, for your insightful remarks. I have now the pleasure of inviting Ms. Yu Ping. She's a Senior Program Officer at the Office of the Envoy on Technology. Ms. Ping, you have now the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amin, and thank you so much to Dessa and other colleagues for inviting our office to be here today. I mean, the fact that we meet here virtually, in spite of COVID, is due to the wonders of digital technology. But as all speakers have said, this really brings to fore the question of who is left behind. The ambassador had argued very passionately that for all of us all around the world to be part of the digital world, we really need to bear in mind those that do not have the access to technologies that we ourselves enjoy and that enables us to be here today. So a lot of the speakers have talked about how, for instance, there still remains 3.7 billion people unconnected. Doreen has argued very passionately about how connecting these unconnected is fundamental to the challenge of making sure that no one is left behind. Shamika has gone into details as to how there are these gaps that exist in access to these technologies, such as the gender gap. And this whole fact about these numbers show that the digital space is far from being equal to all. There are, for instance, 79.5 million displaced people in the world, 476 million indigenous people, 1 billion people with some form of disability. All of these people face unimaginable challenges to connectivity. Shamika explained the gender gap that exists in countries, the fact that in 2 out of 3 countries around the world, men are more likely to use the internet than women, and that this gender gap, as estimated by ATU, is only going to increase. So what this means is that there will be fewer opportunities for women to learn, to work remotely, to access healthcare if it's provided online, to use mobile money, and to find critical information. I give you all these statistics as an example to illustrate the very powerful arguments that the other panelists have made, that it is in very real terms that these consequences of not having everybody equally online have ramifications for how they live and interact in this world where COVID has only shown how dependent we are on digital technologies. This digital divide is not just about gender, but also about aspects such as rural-urban divides, disability, minority status, and so on. For instance, globally, about 72% of households in urban areas have access to the internet at home, whilst in rural areas, the number is closer to about half. In Africa, only 28% of urban households have access to the internet at home. In rural areas, it's only 6.3%. These are staggering numbers that really explain the extent to which the divides and the leaving of people behind is severe when we look at specific areas, continents, countries, as well as even in developed countries. So for instance, even in the United States, where many of us are based, the United Nations headquarters is based, the gap in terms of digital access to technologies is very stark, depending on what particular group you belong to or where you live. In the United States, for instance, where there are, for instance, now an estimated 55 million students that have to be remotely educated because of COVID pandemic. An estimated 12 million cannot do it at home, and they need to rely on hotspots or Wi-Fi. They're provided ad hoc by libraries or by a McDonald's near their house. This goes for elderly people as well. Almost 1 in 3 households in the United States, headed by a person over the age of 65, does not have access to a computer. In rural America, only 61% of residents have access to broadband internet, which means that 23 million rural Americans cannot subscribe to broadband in their homes. On tribal lands, 7 in 10 rural tribal residents, which is 1.3 million people, lack access to broadband. And this is the state of play in the United States, which is arguably one of the richest countries in the world. Imagine the digital divides for minorities, for women, for rural communities in other places in the world, which don't have the resources that the United States has. This is really stark that even as we talk about connecting people all around the world, even as we talk of the benefits of digital technologies, it is certain groups of individuals, certain groups and communities that do not have access to these types of technologies. And I think it's been explained by many speakers that the inequalities that are experienced offline are then repeated, compounded by the lack of access to digital technology, broadband, connectivity, and so forth. And this is truly what we need to address if we are to leave no one behind and achieve the SDGs. And so I'm very inspired by the words of the other speakers in saying that this is the time to take action. As we realize our dependence on digital technologies due to COVID, this is when we also need to step our efforts to make sure that no one is left behind, and that we need to broaden the digital opportunities, access, affordability of these technologies to make sure they reach us all. This is also where I think we can really look to what is possible and what can be done. Accessibility needs to reach also the digital world. We need to create a digital space that is designed and usable for all, not just for a few. So Doreen has explained the need to connect the unconnected. It costs $428 billion, the ITU estimates, and this is going to be very important to require collaborative efforts. So for instance, transformative projects like GIGA to connect all schools and communities to the internet that's being led by ITU and UNICEF will be very important. But it's not just about achieving connectedness to the internet. The connectivity for all also has to be meaningful. It has to be fair. This means ensuring that there are adequate gadgets and services available to all at an affordable price, and that people have the necessary skills needed to use these gadgets and services. And this means addressing in very concrete terms the obstacles that different groups face in accessing the internet. And so the communities that are gathered here today around the Commission for Social Development, the various communities and stakeholder groups are very important in making sure that these access and these gadgets, these services are truly inclusive for all. So for instance, persons with disabilities, with visual impairment, they require very different types of services to those with cognitive obstacles. The design of digital services, gadgets, and policies need to be universal. Universal design means that everyone should be able to use it and no one is excluded. We have to make sure that content is adequate, accessible, relevant, and offered in a language that's suitable for a user and in a format that a user can use. And this, I think, in some ways requires a very different approach that we take from the start. We need to conceptualize products and services and programs in different ways. And people from different parts of society and different groups, many of the stakeholder communities represented here today as CSocD, have to be included in the planning and design of processes from the start. To be very frank and very honest, in some ways, Western able-bodied men have been designing a lot of the products and services that we use today. And so a lot of the products and services we use do service the needs of Western able-bodied men, but we need to broaden the conversation and design of these products in such a way that different groups have to be part of the way we provide content and develop products, which can then help and empower everybody around the world. We also need an intersectional approach because as many people identify in different groups, we need to think about how these intersectionalities create new complexities and new needs. Older people live with a disability, for instance. Indigenous people might be located in rural areas, and for people living in the LDCs, women are more often excluded from men. So these intersectionalities lend a layer of complexity that has to be addressed, especially as we talk about the need for digital inclusion and accessibility of all. I think there are promising signs that the world has come to realize the need for us to ensure all of these things. So for instance, the gender gap has narrowed in South Asia to some extent. There's also, for instance, some additional research, I believe from the GSMDA, that shows that over the next 5 years, closing the gender gap in mobile internet use in lower middle income countries could deliver an additional $700 billion in GDP growth. So there is a lot of potential for us to work together, to come together through a whole government approach, as ITU and Doreen had emphasized, through a multi-stakeholder approach, involving and engaging all these stakeholder communities to really bring to bear the potential that digital technologies can have to all of us. And this, in some ways, is the approach that's been underlined by the Secretary General when he issued the Roadmap for Digital Cooperation just last year. In this, he emphasizes the question of digital inclusion, bringing together all these communities as being fundamental to achieving a more equitable online world for all. It lays out fundamental steps that the Office of Technology Envoy is now working in partnership with many of you stakeholders to do. So for instance, laying out a framework for digital inclusion, promoting this very important aspect that will have an agreed definition and matrices to measure in very concrete terms how well we are doing in ensuring that all groups are part of this digital world and can participate as equally and fully as possible. I think this is a first step towards real action, because without a measure of digital inclusion and digital literacy, it will be very difficult to say where we are now, much less where we actually want to be. I think as we aim to build back better.
Sorry to interrupt.
1 more minute.
Seconds left. Yeah.
30 seconds. I'm just on my last sentence, so I just want to sum up right now. I think especially as we are building back better from COVID, it is really important to be aware of who we're building back for, and to really engage stakeholder communities and all of us gathered here today as part of that solution to make sure that the world that we build back after COVID is even more equitable and inclusive than ever before. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ping, for your insightful remarks. We will now begin our panel discussion, moderated by Ms. Kristen Salome. She's a correspondent at Al Jazeera English in New York. Ms. Salome, you have now the floor. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amin. I'm very excited to be here. We have such an amazing array of experts lined up to address these very pressing issues, from private sector, public sector, academia. And if everyone will bear with me, I want to introduce everyone briefly and encourage our viewers to put questions in the chat. We have incredible brain power here right now, and people can ask questions and get them answered. So the quicker I can introduce everyone and let them introduce themselves, the quicker we can get to those questions and talk really practically about solutions for bridging the digital divide, and not just the state of affairs, but how we move beyond the current situation to a better place. So with that, let me start by introducing Leah Bonet-Rull. She's the Deputy Mayor of Barcelona for the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Her profile includes digital transition, international relations, among many other things. I'm looking forward to speaking with her about how local governments are incorporating technology into what they do, particularly in the COVID age, and maybe some successes and challenges for local governments. On the corporate side, we've got Dr. Julia Glidden here. She is a vice president for Microsoft's worldwide public sector, an internationally recognized expert on digital government, an expert advisor to the UN and the EU. We're very privileged to have her here. She can give us a little bit more on the big picture and what tech is doing to address these needs and issues. Alison Gilwald is a leading expert when it comes to African digital policy. Her think tank is ICT Africa. It spans 20 countries across the continent. So she will give us an update on the situation in Africa. Nicole Turner-Lee, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. This isn't just a developing world problem. There's a digital divide here in the United States and in developed countries as well. And I'm telling you all this so you can line up those questions, get those questions ready for these people. We've got Nena Wakana from the Geneva-based World Wide Web Foundation. She's an expert and an advocate when it comes to bridging the gap between local government and global governance. I know she wants to talk not just about inclusion, but meaningful inclusion, what that means. And then last, but certainly not least, Mr. Jan van Dijk. He's a professor of communication science at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, a very prolific author. He's written so much about digital media, digital democracy, the digital divide, and can give us a perspective on big tech and where they fit into this whole scenario. So with that, if I could come back around and talk to Deputy Mayor Rull, Leah, can you give us a sense of how governments have been handling this transition to digital, some successes that you've seen and some of the biggest challenges that local governments face in getting access to their people? Maybe the pandemic is a good place to start that discussion.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Ms. Salome. And this is indeed a key question for us in Barcelona as we prepare for the recovery and the long-term transformation of our city. Allow me first, however, to thank you and DESA and the rest of organizers for providing cities with a voice in this global dialogue. I am here today, as you said, as Deputy Mayor of Barcelona, but also as part of the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, which we lead along with Amsterdam, New York, and 50 other cities, as well as UN Habitat, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, United Cities and local governments, and Eurocities. The coalition operates under a simple principle: digital rights are human rights. We say so because the way we get to enjoy our right to privacy, to education, political participation, work, accessibility, and many others is shaped by our access to internet and our skills to get the most out of it. And as we transition to the digital age, we all need to make sure that this is a just digital transition that leaves no one behind. In 2020, going digital has become one of the main pillars for avoiding the pandemic and its worst economic and social effects. Digital tools have ensured the continuity of municipal governments and have opened up new businesses opportunities in a context of economic devastation. As a matter of fact, during the first semester of 2020, the ICT sector was the only one in Barcelona actually creating jobs. Remote work and learning digital platforms have protected workers from being exposed to COVID in the workplaces and schools. And in Barcelona, however, there is evidence that the pandemic has affected poorer districts disproportionately. Poor housing conditions and physical work models have caused higher infection and mortality rates in neighborhoods that were already worse off. The socioeconomic crisis is also hitting low-income communities, women and informal workers harder. In Barcelona, for instance, there is a large difference in the increase of the unemployment rate between the lowest income neighborhoods and the wealthier areas. The digital divide is built around these same urban inequalities. Communities without access to internet have been most affected by the consequences of lockdown, socially and economically. And these difficulties are added to existing layers of inequality in our city. And it has all resulted in 56% of low-income workers being unable to telework and 6.5% of students not being able to follow online education due to socioeconomic reasons. Although at that time we didn't have this precise data, we were aware from the very beginning that vulnerable families would suffer more the consequences of going online. We needed to act swiftly to address the digital divide. This is why we set up a digital inclusion strategy based on 3 main pillars. First, we needed to provide a quick response to mitigate the effects of digital inequalities. And for this, we started implementing an emergency plan. Second, we needed to have more precise data on the extent of the digital divide in the city. And to do so, we carried out a citywide survey on this issue. And third, we needed to start planning for long-term policies that provide a structural response to this new form of urban exclusion. So the first thing we needed to do was to provide an emergency response. By the end of April, 5,300 mobile devices, tablets or laptops, had already been distributed to students without access to them. We also strengthened the municipal network of neighborhood digital facilities, the so-called Fab Labs, where residents can access programs for digital training. The city also provided municipal offices in low-income neighborhoods with trainers to teach people digital skills to access municipal procedures online or use video conferencing software and email, among others. Grants went to community organizations combating the digital divide for specific groups such as migrants and low-income women. And a small multicultural team of digital trainers has been set up to accompany families in need of support for their children's online education. These measures have been useful to provide an emergency response to a critical obstacle to adequate living conditions in the city during the pandemic. However, they have also made clear that the structural digital inclusion policies by all levels of governments will be key to build back better. And this can only be done with a precise diagnosis of the dimension of the digital divide in Barcelona. This is why during the second half of 2020, we ran a citywide survey to get solid data on this. The results of the survey show that 92% of households have access to internet. And for a large majority of them, it is provided through optical fiber. And while these are indeed excellent news, there is one figure that is extremely worrying. 1% of the city's population does not have home-based connection to internet due to the lack of sufficient economic resources. When it comes to benefiting from digitalization, there are 2 other factors that matter in addition to access to internet. The devices available to access and use internet, and having the skills to get the most out of its usage. Socioeconomic inequalities shape digital inclusion by conditioning the number of and type of available devices, as well as the skills to use internet. In Barcelona, such inequalities are clear. Higher income households tend to have more devices available for their members than lower income families. And a larger share of these devices are laptops, as opposed to the predominance of smartphones in low income households. This should not necessarily be a key factor, But the truth is that there is a direct link between the type of devices and the usages. For instance, it is much more difficult to follow online classes if you only have a smartphone than if you have a laptop. So in the context of COVID and forced lockdown, the devices available have become a key issue. Of course, this has had consequences over the last year, during which 62% of Barcelona's residents have increased the range of activities they do online. Remote work, electronic administrative procedures, and online education are the main uses that grew during 2020. The trend, however, also shows disparities among social groups. Older, less educated, unemployed population segments use less internet and for a less diverse range of usages than younger people, students, people with higher education levels, and employed populations. Digitalization can be a driving force for more prosperous cities, but there is a real risk that it grows into a new layer of inequality instead. So a brief recap. In Barcelona, we have between 6,000 and 10,000 households without access to internet due to economic reasons. An income divide when it comes to number and type of devices, and inequalities on the kind of uses that people make of internet, which go along the lines of age, education, and employment differences. And in the context of building a structural digital inclusion policy, we also face a major challenge: the lack of evidence on what works and what does not work to address the digital divide in a multidimensional fashion and in an urban setting. And this is where the third part of the strategy comes into play. We are now planning for a pilot project that thoroughly assesses the impact of different digital inclusion interventions from the municipality. This will take place as an experiment in the policy sense of the term, aimed at assessing whether providing access to internet and devices to families is enough to overcome the digital divide, or whether further support is needed. This has major implications in terms of policy making and resources needed. So before we go for one option, we need to test whether this is the right one. The pilot will identify families that are affected by the digital divide in terms of lack of access to internet and uses. Some of the families will be provided with internet access and laptops without training, and some other families will also get in digital training. We will also create and develop a catalog of resources for digital training that will be provided to participants through what we call ICT agents, which are the trainers. And to ensure that we can really measure the impact of such policies, we will develop and apply a robust set of ex-ante and ex-post assessment indicators that will help us track our success in bridging the digital divide. These are the main features of Barcelona's strategy to ensure digital inclusion for all. As you can see, cities and local governments have a key role to play in detecting vulnerabilities and needs, and in experimenting with solutions and policies. We can also build an ecosystem of inclusion, linking private technology operators with community organizations, and also generating regulatory and financial incentives for their collaboration. But let me be clear, cities can do a lot of things, but we cannot do it all on our own. We need to get our national governments on board, as well as the private sector operators and community organizations. And a rights-based approach to digitalization is probably the only way to place social justice at the heart of the digital transition, with binding obligations to provide access to internet, to digital skills, and to adequate devices. We need the international community and national governments to update the current legal framework to this reality, recognizing that the right to participation, education, accessibility, social care, gender equality, work, or housing now involve access to internet, skills, and tools. Digital rights are human rights, and digital inclusion is part of them. City governments will continue to strive to ensure a just digital transition that leaves no one behind. but we need to be able to count on national governments and the private sector to play their part too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from our audience already because it's a very specific and good one for Ambassador Maria about the universal access plan that she described for Argentina. And I know she has to leave us soon. So Ambassador, could we ask you what from that plan has been implemented so far? Is it active now? And what % of your total population is now connected?
So I think you're muted, Ambassador. Sorry.
Thank you. I mean, thank you, Kristen. Thank you for the opportunity for the question and for the answer, the possibility for the answer. Yes, the program is implemented now. And the other question, what % of the total population is now connected? At the moment in my country is connected 85% of people. For us is very, very important, but we have a very long history about that. I was very, very interested in the last intervention, and I invited to visit the Plan Conectar for internet, because we are connected in the school since 2012 and 2013. And this is the computer for a student and for the teacher, professor, and the tools for work with that. It's a very, very interesting program. The program, the name is Conectar Igualdad. In my view, it's interesting to see in the page wave this program. But really we have I believe we have in a good sense in this point in my country. Thank you very much.
And thank you for that response. Timed perfectly for construction crews to start drilling on my roof. So hopefully you can still hear me. Let's go on with our panelists and talk now to Julia Glidden from Microsoft. Julia, I know you probably know better than anyone the big picture situation. We know half the world still lacks broadband. What do you see in terms of technological advances that may help the situation? And you know, has the coronavirus, we're hearing about the divide between those who have and those who have not being more pronounced now, whether digitally or socially. Do you see COVID as an opportunity, or has it set us back? And that's something I know I'm interested in hearing from you.
No, you know, that it's an excellent question. And when I look back on this extraordinary and extraordinarily hard and painful year, it's been a tale really of two cities. When the world needed technology the most, technology was there during the darkest hours of the pandemic. It was truly humbling, my colleagues and I at Microsoft, to see the way in which literally 20 years of digital transformation, those of us that have worked to modernize public sector, to introduce digital technologies around the world for the good of humanity, we saw in 2 months, 20 years of digital transformation. If we could go to the next slide. Keeping courts alive, enabling first responders to stay connected with those in need, and enabling healthcare workers, even through things like augmented reality, to maintain a human touch with patients, to stay in touch with doctors, as we've talked about, students to stay at their desks. But these statistics that we've heard over and over, they're chilling. These are statistics that are almost so big. 3.5 billion people, half the world not having access to fundamental services during the darkest hours of the pandemic is simply not it's not acceptable. And when I think about what I've devoted my career to, it makes me feel a sense of shame, because I saw technology at its best. But when half the world could not, when 1 billion students could not continue to learn, when women were still disenfranchised from accessing fundamental services, and we know that it is women that keep families together, that are the engines of economic growth, it is really a call for action for all of us. So yes, we saw tremendous deployment of technology, tremendous innovation. The public sector should be so incredibly proud. And I was, just humbled to hear the stories coming from around the world and out of Barcelona, always a leader. But this is a rallying cry because we've seen we can do it. The risk of doing nothing for the first time when it came to digital innovation in government and across the public sector became higher than the risk of doing something. That was an opportunity, but it's an opportunity we all need to seize as we ingest the reality of these statistics and then together try to forge a more collaborative model of working together. I've heard references about public and private sector collaboration. I know Doreen, Shamika, Daniela talked about the need to bring together new and more innovative ways of collaborating. And I think if we go to the next slide, there are 3 areas where I believe we can really try in a whole of government manner to make new collaborative models, more open and inclusive models for all together. Global connectivity. We've talked about it. How do we practically together, public and private sector, SMEs, civil society, third sectors, work together? Well, governments can put legal and regulatory and financial frameworks in place. They can make it affordable. They can make it attractive for the private sector to invest in inclusion. But at the same time, the private sector, and especially the tech industry that's brought so much goodness to bear during the crisis, but it's also benefited during this crisis, needs to continue to give back through initiatives like Microsoft's PC in Africa initiative to enable more secure and connected devices for small businesses, through the UN's private sector facility, bringing together tech companies and the public sector to plan for the recovery, to infuse the digital skills, the data, the technology into societies for the economic recovery that we hope to come as we move into, we used to say the next or the new phase of the pandemic. I think it's the next phase because we're going to be seeing rolling phases. Education, training, skilling. The world is not going to go back. Digital will be infused throughout our societies to a greater extent than ever before. And that is going to create a demand for new types of skills, for new types of jobs, for new types of roles. So if we simply address the connectivity problem, and as I said, we can't underestimate it, we also have to make sure that we leave no one behind. And Amin, I loved what you said, that leaving no one behind means leaving no one offline. And that also means skilling. Microsoft has really done some tremendous things, 42 countries bringing millions of people online for the skills they need to participate in the digital economy. But that's not enough. We've launched with LinkedIn and GitHub and another initiative, really bold, 25 million people around the world, not just to be able to identify the new jobs that are going to be in demand, but to have access to free and accessible learning pathways, and then accreditation that they can use to show the new employers, the employers in the post-COVID world, that they have those skills. But then, of course, last but not least, accessibility. And here the statistics are equally stark and equally alarming. 15% of the World Health Organization estimates, has some form of disability. 70% of those are not noticeable. So we don't even know when we're dealing with a colleague who is facing a disability or a need for greater accessibility. 1 in 10 people with disabilities lack the basic tools they need, the basic technology tools they need, the basic fundamentals to do their job. And with those kinds of statistics, it's no wonder that half of disabled people, the unemployment rate is double for disabled people. When I look at my industry, the tech industry, that again places a tremendous moral obligation on us all to ensure that we build accessibility into everything we do. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, says, I think very presciently and very powerfully, that accessibility is not a bolt-on. it has to be built into every product every tech company designs so that every person in the planet can achieve their full potential. And I think it was Yu Ping who talked about the need to make sure that as we do this, we're not building bias in. We need to co-create. We need to co-create, all of us, civil society, people with abilities, people with disabilities, the third sector, private sector. We need to co-create so that as new technologies like AI come online that have a powerful ability to help target jobs and tools for people in need, we're not building those biases into the algorithms. We're making sure when we bring voice to speech to text recognition online, when we're bringing visual and facial recognition technologies online, that we're doing so in the most inclusive and affordable way, because societies most need this. So connectivity, skilling, accessibility. If we go to the next slide, and in conclusion, when we bring those together, this tale of two cities that I talked about, the best of worlds and the worst of worlds that we saw during COVID, I believe that it is there in partnership together, new, more collaborative, more inclusive ways of working together. So we build a new model of ensuring that digital is a force for social good, not a force for social disruption, not a force for a digital divide, but a force for social good, that by working together, by being collaborative, we benefit society for everyone. And in that way, we can fulfill the UN's mission for digital inclusion and social equality for all by 2030, and the Microsoft mission to ensure that every person and every organization on the planet is empowered to do all. So thank you very much for this chance to share these ideas and these thoughts with you today.
Thank you, Julia. I want to go now to Alison Gilwald from ICT Africa. And maybe you can talk about the situation of digital inclusion in Africa right now. What are the biggest challenges you see there? And yeah, give us an overview.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Can you see my screen?
Yes, if you can just make it like a slideshow. Thank you.
Yes, I will do. I think I'm just going to bob around a bit because I think a lot has been said, fortunately. And I also just wanted to pick up on some of the points that had been made. I think, I suppose the main point I wanted to make was that, the digital divide, digital inclusion, various of the things that are spoken about, connectivity, all of these things on their own do not address or redress digital inequality. Digital equality is really far more substantive than just supply side infrastructural measures. It's really a massive demand side issue. So I really wanted to say that we really can't. There's a lot of talk about the big reset, about using this opportunity for new social compacts that are more equitable. A lot of the really good and important things that are being said. But my concern is that we seem to be doing the same things, that we're looking at the same business models, we're looking at the same licensing frameworks, we're looking at the same institutional arrangements that have not served us thus far, that have brought connectivity to so many people, but it actually brought very minimal connectivity within developing country contexts, so to the poor. We have these incredibly low penetration rates that we've spoken about. So I really think from a policy point of view, because I think this has been identified as, together with climate change, one of the most wicked policy problems that we're facing currently, is we have to really move away from the commercial supply side valuation of resources only in our, in our policy towards the demand side valuation that values and realize, the value of what are effectively global public goods, but the social good, the public value of these goods. And so I think we have to acknowledge that the model that we had, the reform model that we had of these commercial supply side licenses, etc., that were valued in terms of their contribution to GDP and what could be extracted for fiscuses from licensing fees, have to be balanced with more demand side valuation mechanisms. And in this spirit, we've really been calling what we need is actually a completely new digital deal, a new deal that's drawing very much strongly on the UN, in fact, Green New Deal, that really will look...
Sorry, Sorry to interrupt. We don't see the slides. We just see one.
Yeah, sorry, I was sort of speaking through them a little bit, but I will move on very quickly to them. I just was going to say that I think what we really need is, the kind of policy experimentation that's been asked for to really to solve these fundamental problems, because they have been, shown the compounding effects of inequality with COVID-19 and the lockdowns associated with them. So I really just wanted to make the first point that actually the really, really critical thing, and I can't emphasize it enough in these discussions, is that we actually don't have the data. The data that's put out is really sort of big supply side estimations. In many countries, it's really completely spurious. So we desperately need the data to identify the actual points of intervention to get these things addressed. And I urge us to continue to work with the ITU and UNCTAD statistics people that are and UN statistics that are trying to do this. But just to broadly give you the picture, and I am arguing that we need to balance measures of GDP and GNI as our measures of value in our society if we're trying to elect these new social compacts that will build equality. But I do think it's important to just identify that broadly, broadband penetration, mobile phone penetration, these basically track GNI per capita. And so we really have to address these systemic and structural problems in society. And then just to speak very quickly about some of the intersectional inequalities that have been spoken about and that are absolutely critical to addressing this problem, because it's not actually, women across the board that don't have access. It's actually women at the intersections of being rural, of ethnicity, of culture, of, a number of things, of class, that really determine whether they are online or not. And it's because women are concentrated at the bottom of the pyramid that you find them reflected in these numbers. In fact, if you look at the urban and rural divide, you'll actually see that the rural divide is actually greater than the urban divide. And then if you look at the concentration of women in those rural areas, actually that's what's reflecting the rural divide as well. But the really important thing about this is that it's only with this demand side data that we can really understand the underlying factors, the macro level factors, the GDP per capita, the aggregated gender statistics that we get, if we can, out of the supply side data, really mask the inequalities within these different groupings and sections. So we really need to look at that. And then I just wanted to say a little bit more about the real challenges of connectivity, because obviously it is a precondition, although I've said it doesn't address digital inequality, it is a precondition for reaching it, is that, basically smartphones are the form of internet penetration on the continent, and that aligns with 99.9% of people with smartphones, that's how they access the internet. And in fact, the biggest barrier to accessing the internet is the cost of the device. So the cost of the data comes after that. That affects usage, that affects intensive use, which is a big problem on the continent. But the real problem is the device. So we've got to get different models, different things that will bring down that actual cost, even if it was effectively regulated. Which it largely has not been. The model does not work for these vast numbers of people across the world and continent that don't have it. And I think this has just really been, amplified by the pandemic and the lockdown. It really has brought into stark relief this digital inequality. People, very small numbers of people were able in Africa to move their line on work, to move their schooling online, their banking, etc. And particularly, people were saying the technology was there for us. We were able to keep the public sector going. Well, the public sector was able to keep going, but people were not able to receive their grants at the other end because they were unconnected, or they were not be able to get education at schools and that. So it really is a demand side problem that we're facing. And as I said, the really challenging side of this is we've always known it reflects systemic and structural inequality, but now we really see it the compounding effects of that, of lockdowns, of people being unable to perform basic daily functions, and the lack of digital substitution in order to do that. And then just to understand, the impacts of this in terms of COVID and the technology. Basically, the technology was not there for Africa. In no country that we've been able to establish have technologies that have been used elsewhere for contact tracing, even mobile databases for hotspot movements, etc. In terms of AI dashboards, in terms of Bluetooth contact tracing mechanisms, these are not available. We don't have sufficient smartphones. The technology was not used. This technology was not available to Africa during the pandemic. And then just to speak very specifically about the informal sector, which is the traditional buffer to these kinds of exogenous shocks? Well, across the 10 African countries that were surveyed in 2018 as part of the Africa survey, only 7% of informal sector businesses were using the internet for business purposes. So, you know, with these kinds of figures, you can see that there's just simply not the critical masses, never mind for economic growth, but for these kind of 60% intensity that you need for contact tracing equipment and that kind of thing. So really, under lockdown, the informal sector has not been able to perform this traditional role and has really been obliterated by the lockdowns and you know, just the survival mechanisms that they require. And just to emphasize that the point that was made by several of the speakers, that this really is, from a policy point of view, the central sort of digital inequality paradox that we're facing, that as we connect more people, digital inequality increases, doesn't decrease. And in a data environment, this is all the more, you know, significant, because it's not only those who are connected and not connected where there's obviously a gap, but it's also those who are barely connected and those that are able to, you know, transact online, reduce their own transactional costs, and even produce wealth for nations. So if it really raises, you know, basic issues around our universal access strategies, our school strategies, you know, we've got areas of South Africa and of the continent where we do have a high number of schools connected. But under the last year, this has meant nothing. Basically, I mean, I hate to put it so harshly, but we now have to go back to thinking about those times before the mobile phone, when we were saying, you know, we need a device in every home. Is that an adjusted, you know, digital set-top box? Is that some other new kind of equipment that we can bring at low cost, mobile kind of equipment, but that is based in the house, people can use for these rolling pandemics that we're going to be facing? We have to be thinking completely differently. So what kind of policy interventions could there be? As I said, we really need a digital new deal to address this. We have to look not only at the way these policies can be realized at the national level, and I think lots of people have spoken about that, so I'll just move on, but we do need transversal digital policies. This is not a sectoral issue, this is not an infrastructural issue, this is not a supply side issue. Education is as important, and it's not just about coding, and it's nothing. We need, you know, whole changes to our curriculums and things to actually address the challenges that we're facing. Because as I said, it's not only the digitalization process we're dealing with, it's a datification process. And, you know, in Africa and those places where we're not connected, we don't have the luxury of sorting that out first and then getting onto the data problems. In order to benefit from the, you know, African free trade agreement, that's the opening up of the African single market, you know, we need to have data governance in place. Even where Africans are not connected, they're becoming data subjects for bio ID systems, etc. You know, in terms of social media, there's enormous problems with representation, etc. For, you know, using that data for various COVID or other public purposes, and even just ordinary planning. So we just really can't continue to do the same thing and hope for different results. Even if prices were effectively regulated, we couldn't afford these services. We have to interrogate current business models, our exclusive licensing frameworks, the extractive rents by governments through regressive taxation, the expensive spectrum fees that are being used to deal with other social problems that we have, or just not being used at all, the misuse of universal service funds, and really to address some of the competitive bottlenecks that we've got in the market, the dominance of market that is just getting more and more concentrated all the time at the national level, but also at the global level, where we have a dominance of global platforms that are appearing, you know, to be accountable to no one. Certainly not, you know, we need to collaborate in order to get data governance, to get privacy protections, and also to collaborate on these global digital taxes, which are one mechanism that we can realize these global public goods at the national level. So I think I've probably run out of time, but there are just some cautionaries here. You know, I think we have to look at why states are not working and how we can get states to work and institutions. So there's a lot of really innovative institutional arrangements and work that we need to do for the new kind of competencies we need for this dynamic and adaptive ecosystem. We need to crowd in productive private sector investments so that they can be leveraged to go into economic areas. And I think there's some interesting models there, if we do have time, around shifting, you know, big state CapEx expenditure to OpEx expenditure by leveraging public and private investments that are there through long-term anchor tenancies by the state. We have to regulate dominance, as I've mentioned, and we have to look at this low-cost experimentation, low-risk experimentation of the market structure. Obviously, there are big long-term investments in various, Gs, and now in 5G, and those things have the evolution that we have to work. But we have to look at enabling more people into the market, enabling micro players, ensuring that there are offsets when 5G operators get that spectrum, that there are offsets for the auction price if they allow infrastructure and sharing. We've just got to make this a lot more flexible. There's a lot of people able to get in, willing to get in at a much lower cost than we've currently got that can deliver those services. But we do need to be careful of the dangers of sort of instrumental, old-fashioned, static competition regulation in this very dynamic environment that can inhibit innovation or completely close down innovation. So we really need, on the competition regulation side, we need to do, we need to be a lot more dynamic and innovative there. And then, of course, as I said, we really need to engage in global and regional governance of these public goods more actively than we have as Africans over the last 3 decades of reform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you very, very much. And from Africa to the United States, we're going to talk to Nicole Turner-Lee from Brookings. Now, we're hearing about the digital divide in Africa and just basic access not being enough. In the United States, we might expect that more people have access to the internet, but maybe you can just start with how big the digital divide is here in the United States, because when I was trying to do some research, I saw numbers that varied from less than 10% to almost 50% of Americans not having meaningful access. How big of a problem is that here? How is that playing out, and how can we fix it?
Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for just the question, and thank you to the United Nations for having me, and to the distinguished panelists before me. It's always hard to go before many people who have touched upon, I think, many of the critical domestic and global policy issues when it comes to digital inclusion, but I'm going to actually do my best. First and foremost, let me just say this as a shameless plug. I actually have a book coming out on the US digital divide, which looks at what I call the digital invisibility that has been created for millions of Americans who sit on the wrong side of digital opportunity. That book is aptly entitled Digitally Invisible: How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. And it really is a discussion on what we have seen, which is the pernicious behaviors that are associated with being connected. What do I mean by that? We have spoken a lot in this conversation around around digital inequalities. Well, I would suggest as a sociologist that what we're actually seeing is an expansion of systemic inequalities. Those systemic inequalities are deeply connected to the fact that people who cannot work online, learn online, live online, love online, get well online, actually are often the people who have already been on the wrong side of digital opportunity. Secondly, we now see in this technological environment where people have to be banked or have levels of financial collateral to actually participate. If you are one of those persons who does not have access to a credit card, you are actually outside of the new ecosystem, which is burgeoning around the transformative practices where people can actually engage from the inside of their home. I mean, I think someone said this earlier, what COVID-19 actually showed us is not just how wide the digital divide is, but it also showed us how many people who live on the wrong side of opportunity generally in the United States and across the country. And so I think this is a conversation that has to be rooted in how do we solve issues related to poverty? How do we solve issues related to housing and food insecurities? And how do we look at the lack of access to broadband being one of those levers that now places another level of complication in our ability to bring universal service to populations wherever you live? And so I'm happy to hear that the UN is doing this, because this is a conversation that's just not based in the United States, but it's global. But let me talk a little bit about the United States. Before the pandemic, and I think Julia actually stated it, we had from the Federal Communications Commission around 18 million people who were not online. This is before the pandemic. I would suggest, given the fact that people have lost their homes, that families have been shifted, we have seen a lot of fatalities here in the United States. What we're actually probably going to see is a large number when we come out of this. We don't currently have really good data for a couple of reasons. We don't have a national broadband map in the United States. So any country that is considering trying to close the digital divide must have data. Without the data, we actually make speculations as to who is connected and who is not. And you know why we do that? Because we often look at the consumption side of this model and not necessarily the side that actually improves quality of life. With that being said, we will probably see an upwards of 50 to 60 to 70 million people that are disconnected. If you take the issue of school-age kids alone, as it was mentioned, upward of 50 million school-age children were actually sent home at the beginning of March. My 14-year-old daughter reminded me yesterday that she has spent one whole year out of school. What does that mean? When we look at families who were disconnected, it was in the range of 15 to 16 million families that did not have either home broadband access or an internet-enabled device. 9 million didn't have either. So let me tell you what the results are 1 year later to actually stay with my challenge of systemic inequalities being broadly connected to the digital divide. There is now a study that tells us that African-American children have a likelihood of being about 8 months to 9 months behind their colleagues when it comes to their disconnection from learning. Low-income kids, 1 year. So what does that mean? And this is from McKinsey. Means that we will have a generation of COVID kids who will be behind in retention of learning that will have an impact on the future of work and their readiness for the emerging technology occupations of tomorrow. That is a problem. Black and brown kids in this country already face inequalities with education dating back to 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education. What that means today is that we will have a similar challenge because these kids are not formally connected to learning. You might be watching here in the United States, we're trying to open schools. I've actually been telling superintendents, you need to reimagine school because the bottom line is where we are seeing the higher rates of susceptibility to the virus is among people of color, rural communities, older Americans, etc. If you live in a household with your grandmother, a foster parent, a Black and brown parent, you are going to be highly likely to get the virus. And as a result, we cannot open schools in those areas where there are high red zones of transmission. That is a systemic inequality that is now playing out in these digital inequities that we've been talking about this morning. The other thing I would just like to mention too, when we start to look at issues related to telehealth, remote work, people of color in this country who are on the wrong side of digital opportunity had to go to work, period. People in rural communities actually saw their businesses close. 100,000 businesses closed in the United States permanently. And as a result of that, we are now going to see many people who will not be able to go back to work because their businesses are gone. A lot of that has to do with accelerated digitization that happened throughout the country. And as a result of companies not being prepared to go online for payments, to be able to shift their business models, we are now seeing companies who were not prepared for the digital shift or what we all have called the Industrial Revolution 4.0. So if you begin to overlay that in these pockets of areas in the United States, where we have already experienced among the poor, among people of color, among the elderly, among the less abled, among foreign-born residents, among tribal residents, levels of inequality. And in my book, I would even suggest farmers now who sit on the wrong side of the digital divide because they cannot be productive. We've set ourselves up for a bigger problem. I want to use just the remaining part of my time just to give some recommendations. So what do we do about this? I appreciated the previous presentation. She labeled it a tech new deal. I actually labeled it, she called it a digital new deal. I call it a tech new deal. Let me tell you why. Here in the United States, we had the pleasure of having the former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who helped this country get through the Great Depression of the 1930s. The same type of circumstances existed in the United States as it did then today. 40 million people filed for unemployment at the peak of this pandemic, the lack of digital access for school-age children, the loss of jobs, etc. With that, I've actually been proposing, and I've written about this, you can find it on the Brookings website, around a tech new deal. And I call that tech new deal something that's a little different from what we've heard today so far, which is a combination of looking at infrastructure and adoption. So understanding broadband deployment, whether it's through 5G, 4G, 3G, fiber. I see Microsoft is on this call, TV white spaces. I tell people, I don't care how we get it. It's a bunch of Post-it notes right now that just need to be framed. But we've got to accelerate infrastructure access in this country, urban and rural. Even if you live in a rural community where you do not have access to facility, the loss of not being connected is just as great as being in an urban community where you have the lack of competition. But we need to figure out ways to actually have as part of this tech new deal, the first part, which is an infrastructure plan that gets across the United States, that is agnostic to a technology, that allows communities to figure out ways to solve the digital access challenges. The second thing that we need to have in this tech new deal is what I'm proposing, which is workforce retraining. Here in the United States, we do not resource apprenticeships or credential easily these types of new jobs that are now resting upon the laurels of the digital economy. We are going to have in the next 5 to 10 years a plethora, like in other countries, of 5G jobs, but yet we do not have paid apprenticeships to allow people to get what would be livable wage scale jobs. We need to figure out ways to do more credentialing as part of the Tech New Deal, the same way that Franklin Delano Roosevelt put together the folks that were part of the Tennessee Valley Authority that built the dams and bridges of this country. I also think that we need to think about a National Digital Service Corps. We have service corps for every aspect of the United States except those that help build networks. One of the things that I identified with schools is that you had superintendents trying to figure out how to build a broadband infrastructure. That's not their job. They're teachers and educators. And so we need to have the laurels of a tech service corps that would actually reach every branch of the United States of America. And this could be applied globally as well to teach people how to engage in this economy. And then I would say third, we need to invest in local startups and businesses. This is the opportune time to break the log jams that have limited capital to diverse founders and women founders and allow them to incubate businesses so that they can hire locally. When we see the permanence of those businesses closing, what are we doing to ensure that we have capital invested in local enterprises to be able to bring jobs back to American communities? And that to me is really important because if we do not do that, we're going to find a lot of people who are displaced. And I would say, in addition to the Tech New Deal, that there are two undergirds of that I will close with. The first is that I don't care where you are on this call, no child should ever be left offline. No child should be left offline. I'm a parent and I have the resources to help my child get access to tutors and other things. There are parents who do not have those resources. It is shameful in the 21st century that we do not send our kids to school with a textbook and a tablet, a pencil and a portable hotspot, and the tools that they need to engage in this new economy. As much as my daughter complains about being on these video calls learning, she's actually learning the new credentials for the future of work, this aggregated work environments, technological tools, etc. And we as a community, a global community, need to make sure that people are prepared for that. And then I would say finally, and someone sort of mentioned this, there's a Tech New Deal, no child left offline, and really a renewal of what it means to have universal service in the countries in which we're in. In the United States, we just do not do enough to close the broadband divide. We don't have the capital, whether it's the private sector by itself or the public sector or a combination of both. We need to revisit what universal service looks like in the United States and perhaps across the globe. I'm one person before the pandemic, I must admit, as I close up, that traveled the world. I went to 7 countries before the pandemic hit that January. But one thing that I realized that is pretty consistent, which is in my book, that wherever people live who are on the wrong side of the track, or on the wrong side of the town, or on the wrong side of the municipality, they're experiencing these challenges. And we need to just do better, whether it's through a compilation of global best practices, or it's a way for us to discuss and tie the digital divide to the systemic inequalities that are basically taking the lifeblood and lifeline out of people that we know. What this pandemic has demonstrated is that the virus, though it did have somewhat of a color because people who were poor, people who were brown, people who were Black, people who were tribal, at least the United States tended to die. But what we did find out is that the glue that kept us all together was broadband. And so the ways in which we can innovate broadband to be much more readily available and accessible, at least in my work at the Brookings Institution, is particularly important, I think, going forward in any conversation that we have domestically or internationally. So I'll stop there, Kirsten. I'm like a preacher. If you get me going, I'm not going to stop. But I have been just really, really full by all of the presentations that have happened this morning, and always happy to sit with my colleagues from across the world talking about this issue.
Well, I appreciate the practical suggestions that you offer, and certainly as a mother of American educated children, I appreciate the challenges that you highlighted. And it's not just about access to the internet, it's about access to education and job training and being able to design the products that people are using and needing. We have 3 speakers left, so if you guys keep it quick, we can get in a couple more questions at the end. And speaking of practical knowledge, we're going to talk to Kamal Ahmad now. She is the founder and president of Copia. And a little change up here as a business person who used technology to not only make a profit for her business, but to help millions of people around the United States access food. Her company is a surplus food waste management company, using their own special technology to dramatically reduce food waste in commercial kitchens. What an amazing thing to accomplish. She's got so many honors, too many to mention. Top 50 most badass women in the world kind of sums it up, I think, in terms of her credentials. So Kamal, thanks for being here. And what can you tell us about technology and harnessing it for good? How are you able to help people and run a business? Wow.
Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates and guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm excited and humbled to be among such great minds tackling the most pressing crises of our time. My name is Komal Ahmed. I'm the founder and president of Copia, a technology company working to reduce food waste and solve the world's dumbest problem: hunger. We do this by incentivizing food producers and businesses to do what's good for their bottom line and what's right for their communities and the planet. Copia recovers and redistributes high quality excess food from businesses and events and rapidly delivers that to feed those in need. Restaurants, hospitals, stadiums, businesses of all shapes and sizes use Copia's platform to request pickups of their surplus food with a few taps on their phone. Within minutes, they are matched to nonprofits in need, and that food is safely redistributed. From first tap to delivery, the entire process takes 26 minutes or less. And I am so proud to share that Copia will feed over 5 million people this year with incredible food that would have otherwise been wasted. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of feeding the entire population of Ireland. Shout out to Ireland. Before COVID-19, hunger was prevalent, not just in the poorest nations, but also the wealthiest. Right now, the World Food Program expects the number of hungry people to balloon to nearly 300 million. As the pandemic continues to take its toll, the global pangs of hunger grow louder, threatening to reverse decades of progress. Meanwhile, over 40% of the food that we produce globally is wasted, is sent straight to landfills. We waste 3 times more food than there are hungry mouths to feed, than it would take to eradicate hunger globally. And if food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of methane after the US and China. This stark reality is exactly what makes this the world's dumbest problem. We have more than enough food to feed every person on the planet. It is not a lack of resources. It is an inequitable and inefficient distribution of them. Hunger is not a scarcity problem. It's a logistics problem. Across the world, millions still lack access to technology. And that's only been intensified by the pandemic. But access to technology should not be what prevents people from getting the meals they need to survive. That's why Copia is bridging that gap. We shortcut lengthy and bureaucratic processes for hungry people to get food, and we empower the other side of the marketplace to feed them. With Copia, reducing food waste and feeding hungry people is smarter and faster than ever before. Copia also provides data and analytics to reduce food waste and CO2 emissions, while unlocking millions of dollars in tax incentives and cost savings for our partners. We've helped businesses and nonprofits save over $21 million to date. Now, the time has come to apply this common sense solution globally. The time has come for humanitarianism to meet modern day technology. The scalability of our technology was put to the test as Copia went from responding to everyday hunger to the California wildfires and now to the worst pandemic in over a century. In America alone, nearly 50% more people are going hungry because of COVID. Businesses and restaurants have closed, causing food supplies to screech to a halt. But people still need to eat. In response, Copia raised funds to revive local restaurants and rehire workers to make thousands of meals daily. We re-engineered our technology and reconfigured our logistics to deliver high-quality restaurant meals directly to the doorsteps of those who are most vulnerable and at risk to COVID. The new iteration of our technology, along with knowledge of real-time demand, drove the distribution of an additional 500,000 meals in just 3 cities alone. In doing so, we engineered a critical solution for real-time distribution during natural disasters and global pandemics. And the potential for Copia goes beyond just redistributing food. Food, after all, is the most perishable and difficult thing to move. But by using the same types of sophisticated algorithms and logistics partners, we can start to redistribute vaccines, medical supplies, clothes, books, whatever is needed and whatever is in excess. Our goal is to make Copia the most intelligent, most effective platform for the redistribution of surplus resources. We're just starting with the hardest one first. Because remember, it's not a lack of resources. It is the inequitable distribution of them. And after spending my entire adult life searching for an effective solution to hunger and food waste, I am here before you today to share there isn't an all-encompassing one-size-fits-all solution, and there never will be. The digital and logistical infrastructure we've established in the United States will be different than the ones required in Ethiopia, in Somalia, in South Sudan, where hunger is most prevalent. With just a smartphone, all countries can have a seat at the table. The adaptability of our mobile technology allows countries with basic infrastructure to still have the power to reduce food waste. At the core of this movement lies local businesses, organizations, and governments trying to take action in their own communities. With Copia, we can accelerate the cooperation between top-down and grassroots efforts. So what will it take for your community to ignite change? First is an evolution in our collective mindset. While there is no quick fix to world hunger, there is more than enough food to feed everyone. Whatever available resources your country has the power to spark progress today. Second is customizing solutions to direct the right resources to the right people. That's Copia's bread and butter. Our low-cost technical infrastructure and operating model can be customized to fit any city or any country. We can ignite the micro movements that make the macro movement possible. But a successful global recovery from the pandemic depends on international cooperation and an international commitment. It means getting governments, industries, and organizations across the globe to buy in. Doing the right thing also drives huge financial returns. Fixing food waste is a $2.5 trillion opportunity. And for us to tap into this opportunity, policymakers must enact legislation that requires companies to take action against food waste and invest in more sustainable practices. Countries like France and Italy have made food waste illegal, imposing massive fines on throwing away or destroying unsold food. Conversely, businesses that donate their food receive millions of dollars in tax incentives and liability protection. Doing good intelligently helps the world and your bottom line. Global partnerships and targeted legislation have the power to reduce emissions, enable worldwide food security, and kickstart our recovery from this deadly pandemic. But now is not the time for flowery prose and half-hearted promises. Our planet is in collective crisis. For us to pave a united path forward, we must demand industries, governments, and societies adapt their actions and their priorities. We must demand that meet the challenges of today, and we must demand it now. Hunger has no nationality, no religion, nor color. It surpasses all geographical bounds. And let's not be fooled. Hunger is not negotiable. It will not resolve itself. It will not go away if we do nothing. Some may be overwhelmed at the task ahead, claiming that eradicating hunger is impossible. But in the words of the late and great Muhammad Ali, impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who prefer to live in a world as it is, instead of using the power they have to challenge it, to change it, to improve it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. The impossible does not exist. And we cannot tolerate a world where we waste 3 times more food than there are hungry mouths to feed. We will not tolerate it. By virtue of being here, we all have more power at our fingertips than entire generations who came before us. The world may not remember what we say here today, but they will remember what we do. What will you do with the power that you have? Today, I ask you to spread awareness of movements like ours. Help us connect with global businesses, as well as implement mutually beneficial policies that end food waste and reward redistribution. The urgency of today requires leaders, not necessarily by rank or title, but who are unstoppable, who are unfazed. Leaders who refuse to leave life as it is because they know that if change is going to happen, it's up to them. The path to achieving the unachievable may be long and uncertain, but it starts with taking those simple steps together. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Building on the momentum that organizations like COPI are creating, we can harness the power of our technology and the strength of our goodwill to continue eliminating hunger and food waste. Let us all be the leaders we wish we had. It has been one of my life's greatest honors to be speaking here at the United Nations today. I invite you all to join me in reminding the world that impossible is just another word. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you so much, Kamal. Nena Wakanma from the World Wide Web Foundation, your area of expertise is Africa. Allison really laid out in detail the state of affairs there. I'm wondering if you can focus on policy changes perhaps that you see would improve the situation, not only so that there's more internet access, but more meaningful inclusion when it comes to technology. And I'm seeing questions coming up in our chat if you have time as well. And we're running out of time, so we have 2 speakers and 10 minutes each left for you guys. But if you have time, a question from Edgar. He doesn't say what country he's from, about privacy and security and how it's regulated in Africa. If that's something that you'd care to address as well in your 10 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, everyone. And for every single person that has stayed till now, I do appreciate your patience. And I want to say you should be on your way out and you're still here. Thank you very much. We're talking about digital inclusion for all. That is a very simple way of saying be part of the digital world, be part of creating it, be able to access it, and be able to use it to solve your problems. That is basically where we are at digital inclusion. I'm sure you know about the Web Foundation. I'm going to ask you a question. What will the world be today in this pandemic if we did not have the World Wide Web? You need to think of it. So digital has become a case of life or death. You must have seen our work with the A for AI, the Alliance for Affordable Internet. You might have heard of the work we do with the Digital Corporation. or with the Broadband Commission or Equals in Tech or Women Rights Online. For lack of time, I don't want to dwell on this. I just want to keep it real. And I hope to give you 2 minutes back, Kristen, and talk about meaningful connectivity, the things that touch us. Because if we want to be part of the digital agenda, we need to make it meaningful. I'm cognizant of all that our previous speakers have shared with us, and that makes my life easy. I'm going to put off my 4 fingers and I'll say, what does it mean to be included? Please do not forget that our hashtag is everyone included. You know about leave no one behind, but here we are speaking digital, here we're speaking inclusion, and our hashtag is everyone included. Meaningful connectivity means that you are not just connected, but you are meaningfully connected. You have the connectivity that allows you to create and to benefit and to be a full web or internet citizen. The first thing is that you should be able to access the internet daily. I'm speaking slowly so you could take note and evaluate your country or your company policies. If you are not regularly accessing the internet, you are not meaningfully connected. And minimum threshold is daily access. It means that you have an appropriate device. Someone has said here about the use of smartphones and laptops. You cannot be a digitally connected citizen in today's world if you only have a feature phone, because it has to allow you to be able to do the things that every other person is doing. So the second point is an appropriate device, and the minimum threshold is at least a smartphone. Meaningful connectivity means that you have enough data. If you're buying 1 gig for 1 month, you are as good as dead, if I should use that word. You need enough data, and we think that the minimum threshold should be unlimited broadband, either at home, in school, or at work. But the home broadband internet access is really critical, because over the pandemic, you have seen everyone says, hey, work from home, hey, school from home, hey, do this from home. How would you do this if you do not have unlimited broadband internet access at home? It also means fast connection. And we think that the minimum threshold should be 4G. If you are living a life on 2G, you are not living a meaningfully connected life, and you need to upgrade your life. So it is very simple. These 4 things: be able to connect daily. Kristen, that means that if a government for any reason should shut down the internet, that I think we should be serious about condemning it. It means that you should have an appropriate device. And so when we are encouraging people to do things, we need to talk about the devices that they use. It means that you have enough data, broadband internet connectivity. Being just connected is not enough. Broadband internet connectivity, a fast broadband internet connectivity is needed for you to be meaningfully connected. I'm going to wrap up. Normally I speak plenty, but I see that you've stayed here, and my job is to wrap it up. Digital inclusion is intersectional for the World Wide Web Foundation. We can talk technology all day. You know me, my name is Nina, I come from the internet, but today I want to say that technology alone does not solve the problem. We have to build in the policy part of it, because we have to have the right policy drive to it. Alison has touched on some bits, but to policy and technology, we need to add a right-based approach. If connectivity to the internet does not become a human right after this pandemic, I don't know what we're doing as humanity, because our life practically now depends on digital inclusion. So please, put down this note that the Web Foundation is calling again, as Tim Berners-Lee called on the day we launched the roadmap for digital cooperation, that it is high time that we engage as humanity through the UN, through digital cooperation, for broadband internet access to be officially made a human right. Humans are us. I'm in West Africa, I'm sitting in Abidjan, and I need the skills. I'm speaking to you on a laptop. I have fiber to the home. I have my rights respected. I believe that our governments are in the right policy space, and I have the right technology. I want to end with this quote from the inventor of the World Wide Web that says the internet is not just a technology, it is knowledge, it is opportunity, it is empowerment, it is critical to life in today's world. And so, Christine, to the question that was asked of me, I will say this is the time for us to treat connectivity as a life or death issue. This is the time for us to work, you being spoke earlier, in the framework of digital cooperation. No one country alone can do it. Once again, my name is Nena. I come from the internet, and I want to say digital inclusion is an intersection, and you need to be meaningfully connected. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I want to go quickly now to Professor Van Dijk from the University of Twente at the Netherlands, in the Netherlands. You've written so much about the social aspects of digital media. We haven't talked a lot about big tech as well, which is something else I know you've been following very carefully. What is their responsibility and in all of this in terms of getting people access and protecting vulnerable communities online, making sure they have free speech. So many things we could discuss, but I'll let you take it away.
The concern being obviously the leadership issue and the challenge that they had with the appointment.
The responsibility of these platforms, these big tech companies of the world, 5 of them Americans, 2 of them Chinese, which control the whole of the internet, is to make better media offers. That means the quality of, for instance, how the social media work. Because on this moment, they are deteriorating. It's going back down, what's going on the social media, because it's all more disinformation, polarization, and the like coming on. So it might be that, well, actually, this is a tool, especially for people with low digital access, social media, for people with low education and the kind, and it's a good tool for them, then it could become worthless for them. And so there is an opportunity and there is a responsibility for these big techs to improve this, but they only can do it with the help of the government and with the law and the regulation. Now the governments in the world are all now discussing how to take up these big companies for regulation and the like. I have some slides, Amin. Do you have to bring it to me, or have I do it myself?
Let me try, just 1 second, sorry. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I don't have written a book about the digital divide, which is actually the topic of this conference, but also about the social effects of the digital media in general. And one of these topics in this book, The Network Society, it's called The Network Society, is how to deal with big tech and how can we regulate the internet platforms. We have 4 instruments to do this. And the first 2 are the most used in the world at this moment. First is competition law that break them up, the big ones, into smaller companies. The second one, when they try to merge, scrutinize this by government, whether this is a good idea or not. For instance, in 2014, we saw that Facebook were merging with Instagram and WhatsApp into a big complex of social media, which are now dominant in the whole of the world. I think this is not a good option, these first two strategies, because they're only economic and they don't really work in fact. So that will I illustrate in just a moment. The third instrument is updating existing laws on the domains of a lot of domains in this thing here, and it might be about data, who are the owners, what are the rights of data, about content, about freedom of expression, intellectual property. We'll talk about media diversity, privacy, labor conditions, consumer rights, taxing, and the like. Well, all these kind of laws have to be updated and to make appropriate for the online environment, because most of them are still made for the offline world. And just make it to the same, and that is not a good option at all. My solution is actually that the instruments of third and four are the best options. That means self-regulations by the platforms themselves, but with strict and up-to-date regulation. International laws, like for instance, in the United Union, you have the Commission who has brought a new act, Digital Service Act, Digital Market Act, and this is a first attempt to make a law which is up to date, to made for platforms, how to deal with them. That might be an option. And in this acts of the European Union, you see that it's actually still self-regulation of the platforms, but they have to do what to do. It's not for nothing that even Zuckerberg from Facebook says, we need better regulations. Now we have to decide ourselves whether this comment or the sums is some kind of, is this an hate speech or not? And this is actually something to do with the law. And go back to the last slide, please. Yeah. I am against direct government intervention, because that's what we see when authoritarian countries in the world will do. They are blocking, for instance, like now in Myanmar, all the social media. So that's not a good option. And for instance, Germany is forcing the social media to filter all the things they don't like. This is not a good option. It's a better option that platforms themselves will do it with the help of their users, with more importance input of users, with the guiding of clear new laws, and they have to be updated. That's the big thing to do. Smaller, all these things, and make it go against the mergers, for instance, those mergers of Facebook and the like, are not really working in a network economy. In a network economy, we have an ecology of all these actors. We are exchanging all these data. I always give an example of Facebook. Facebook knows everything about you, or a lot about you, even when you are not a member of Facebook. All these platforms, all these companies are exchanging those data and trading those data. So this is not a good option, this only pure economic option to anti-demolition. So I hope that in the coming 10 years, there will be better up-to-date laws about the domains I mentioned just a moment ago, and to make it all better. Then as the last slide here, please. For the long time, my alternative strategy is to stimulate platforms as a public utility, because in fact, at this moment, social media have become public utilities already, like the telephone before. While the telephone has a very heavy regulation, social media have not. When you have to pay a lot for your telephone, you don't have to pay anything for social media. And that's another good thing. And you see now the results of this situation. These social media platforms, for instance, have started in the era of neoliberalism, where they invented a business model of personal advertising, leading to privacy problems and to less rights for users. But they are free, so that's why people like it. It's free, but they have to pay for their privacy and have to swallow advertisements all of the time and have nothing to say about Facebook, Instagram, and the like, nothing to say anything at all. My alternative would be a government stimulation of platform public utilities. And that means, for instance, that we have social media with a low subscription, a few dollars a month, for instance, and perhaps less in the developing countries, following all these laws which have to be updated now, which are privacy friendly and which have more user participation and no ads at all. This is possible. We have these social media platforms already because they are very small, very, very small, and they can't compete with the big ones, which take all. They take all. That's the network economy. They take all when you are big. So there must be a stimulation of governments for this alternative to make it bigger, 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 so they can compete with the commercial platforms, public platforms against public platforms. That will be the future, I hope.
Wow, really interesting topic there. It's such a fine line between government regulation and the tech companies regulating themselves. It makes sense to see that interplay between the two of them that we need. And it seems like we don't hear that conversation very much. So fascinating to hear. Thank you to all of our panelists. I think we're out of time, unfortunately, but we had some really great discussion there. Amin, I will hand it back to you. Thank you so much for organizing this global dialogue on such an important topic.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you so much all our panelists, all the participants. Before we conclude, I will just give the floor to my director, Daniela Bas, to say a few words, and then we end the meeting. Thank you.
Well, Kristen, it hasn't been an easy panel to moderate because the issues were many. The time was very short. The experts, top experts, and the last one, I think, really triggered in us the need to further have conversations on this issue, also from the perspective of having platforms as a public good, if you wish, so, and be inclusive. So I thank you all. I do hope that Kamal and Nemna and all the others keep working for the good of the people in an inclusive manner, as you have done so far, through the use of digital technologies as well. And let's not forget the human touch. It's always very important. We are social creatures, and so let's keep maintaining also that kind of relationships. Thank you very much, and see you very soon for a next event, maybe on some issues that have been brought to our attention today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having us. Bye.